Hello to current and future leaders. Thanks so much for joining us today for another episode of The Big Idea. We have a great guest for you today. Let's bring him in, Earl Diaz.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening,
Yes.
everyone.
Good afternoon. Everyone's in different time zones. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you today about a specific topic. And we have a photo. So if my assistant could bring up that photo. There it is, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity and all the flags of ASEAN. This is a real Southeast Asian effort. And the United States, of course, is supporting the ASEAN Center for Diversity in any way that we can. So thanks for the photo. Let's chat about it, Earl.
Yeah, so thank you, Jason. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is an intergovernmental organization mandated to facilitate cooperation and coordination among the ASEAN member states. So we work with each of the countries and development partners towards the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, as well as the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of such natural resources. So, as an ASEAN region, I think this is very much up our alley because we're a region rich in biodiversity. We're only 3% of the world's surface, but we're home to almost 20% of known plant and animal species in the world. We have
Wow. I knew it was high.
7.
I knew it was high. I didn't know it was that high. Wow.
We're home to 3 of the 17 mega diverse countries in the world. So Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And the Mekong sub-region is also rich in biodiversity. So when we talk about remarkable species and ecosystems and habitats, the ASEAN region has definitely something to be proud of.
Mm-hmm. And tell us why the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Let's get more specific. What is the center hoping to achieve? Why does it exist?
The ACB envisions an ASEAN region whose peoples are equitably sharing and benefiting from the conserved and sustainably managed biodiversity. So, as we know, the benefits that we get from preserved and conserved biodiversity, from the basic necessities up until the cultural benefits and economic benefits that we get from it, nature provides for us all. And so it's important that as a region, we form together and collaborate with each other because most of the time, biodiversity issues know no boundaries. So animals traverse political boundaries. Trees don't know they're in specific countries, and so it's something that's regional in nature for such a high biodiversity region. So it's something that we should really be focusing on.
I was just thinking about wildlife trafficking. And if one country has laws to protect a certain species, for example, let's say elephants, if that elephant just crosses past the border, because an elephant doesn't understand borders in the way we do, that elephant could be immediately killed, hunted, trafficked, because if the different countries have different policies. So I hear you. It's a good idea if the 10 ASEAN member states can get together and agree on what their commitment is going to be, what their laws are going to be. And definitely. I know that policy advocacy is something that the center does. Could you give us a few examples of the types of policies for which you're advocating?
Yeah. So the ACB is actually created to strengthen the science policy interface on biodiversity. So we develop strategic programs on knowledge sharing, capacity development, technical support, as well as in communication. And so on specific policies that relate to biodiversity conservation, our main mandate is to support the ASEAN member states in their alignments and commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversities. And so oftentimes, on a yearly basis, these countries come up with their NBSAPs or National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plans. And so their progress in achieving these plans and activities are something that we consistently monitor. And so, in providing technical expertise and capacity development support to these initiatives, we aim to highlight the importance of policies across all these initiatives. No? So it actually varies per ASEAN member states because, of course, their priorities also vary.
And what are some of the species that are at risk in Southeast Asia? That some
There
of
are a lot of, yeah, there are
endangered.
a lot. Okay. The ASEAN region is actually a hotspot for many endangered species. No, so we can begin with the Philippine eagle, which is one of the largest raptors and predators in the world. Um, we also have the Irrawaddy dolphins that are present in the Mekong region as well as in the seas of the Philippines and up until Indonesia. There are actually a lot more charismatic species like the Malayan tiger, the Sumatran tiger, and the orangutans in Indonesia. But I think beyond these charismatic species, there are a lot more species that need to be conserved, but they're not just as charismatic. And so programs and policies also
Mm,
have to be in place to really protect these species.
that's a good point. We're all very sympathetic to the creatures that are either beautiful in our eyes or that we've heard of, but there are many, many different kinds of species that fit into the ecosystem, and they all need to be considered for protection. It's a very good point. So
That
you are the head of communications and public affairs. I'm sure you are looking at all kinds of ways you can get the word out about these policies and what the center is doing. What are the different types of campaigns that you do?
Mhm. So uh, we at the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is actually implementing a regional campaign. It's called hashtag We Are ASEAN Biodiversity, our
Mhm.
home, our lives, our stories, where we want to highlight stories that emanate from our use and us being part of biodiversity. No? So for this campaign, we worked with influencers, celebrities, and influential people from the region who have lent their voices to become ambassadors or, in the sense, voices of ASEAN
Mhm.
biodiversity. So this campaign is a living campaign, and so we target social media, we target traditional media, as well as communication and education campaigns on the ground that's specifically targeting the youth.
Mhm. And of course, anyone listening to this program who's interested, it's so easy to grab a hashtag and add to the messages. So the celebrities that you use, do you find celebrities throughout the region? Do you try to find someone from each of the 10 member states?
That is the ultimate goal. Right
Mhm.
now, we've worked with a few from at least seven of the ASEAN member states. Of course, there are plans to really tap into celebrities from all of the ASEAN member states, and so we're hoping that by the end of the campaign period, which is in 2025, we hope to have worked with celebrity representatives, not just one or two from each of the ASEAN member states.
That would be wonderful. And I know there's also an education component. I mean, obviously within campaigns, there's an element of education, but I understand that you work on education with academics or teachers or educators. Could you tell us a little bit about what kind of work you have in that sphere?
Mhm. As you know, biodiversity information and knowledge are mostly integrated into the science subjects. No, our thrust at the ACB is that biodiversity has to be mainstreamed into the education sector, and it has to transcend the usual science and technology subjects that we're exposed to. And so we're working with ASEAN member states to integrate biodiversity knowledge into other subjects like math, language, even in
Mhm.
physical education activities, for us to have a more holistic and full understanding of the biodiversity issues that are actually affecting us.
Mm-hmm. Urban planners, architects, business courses, there's so many different fields where biodiversity should be a component and very easily lends itself to be a component for conversation for the people who are studying those fields and working in those fields. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to pause for a moment because I know you brought a couple other photos, and this would be a good time to share them with the audience.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
besides being an absolutely gorgeously taken photo, what are we looking at here?
So this is me during one of my leisure trips in one of
Uh-huh.
the key biodiversity areas near our home. No, so this one was taken in the Verde Island Passage. It's one of the most diverse regions as in not only in the Philippines or in the ASEAN but in the whole world. So the Verde Island Passage is actually one of the tip of the Coral Triangle in the Philippines, and so it contains one of the highest marine biodiversity in the world. No, so this is me um, finding leisure in nature, but my fascination with the outdoors and nature really dates way back, even when I was young, and so I made sure that when I took a course in the university that it will be environmental science. No? So during that time when I got into university, there were just 9 of us in currently enrolled during that batch. But I'm glad to see that 20 years or almost 10 years, 10 to 20 years after, there are more than 40, 50 students enrolled in environmental science. And that's something that's worthy of praise because it only means that more and more people are appreciating nature and its importance, no? Most especially given the context of the changing climate, the pandemic. Yeah, so there.
And what's beautiful about this photo is that you are appreciating marine life in a sustainable way. You are not putting this any of the marine life at risk. The pollution is minimal or not at all. Ecotourism is a huge topic and a potential significant moneymaker for the nations of ASEAN.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the sustainable financing streams that we should be exploring, definitely, in
Mhm.
terms of providing financial support to key biodiversity areas, protected areas, and just tourist hotspots. No? So it provides much support to the livelihoods of people, but also in the protection of areas as pristine as this one in the picture.
I have so many nature trips I could share with you, but I do want to ask, how deep do you think you are in this photo? How
This is
how
probably
low beneath the surface?
yeah, this is probably around 25 feet.
Hmm. That's
So
nice. I
around
don't
20.
know. I think I've managed to go that low once, but I'm jealous. This is a great. It looks like such a great trip. Yeah.
Always a trip to the sea is something that calms me and soothes me because when you're underwater, you actually can't hear anything except yourself, no? And so it
Mhm.
gives you that, like, it. I feel like it expands my headspace. It expands my capacity to really reflect on things. So I like being underwater.
I love that. You're not hearing anything other than yourself. Oh, that's a great moment for contemplation.
Yeah,
I understand you have another photo. Let's take a look at that one.
yeah. So this is a photo I took in one of the indigenous communities in the Philippines. So this was taken in Palawan, in Brooks Point, Palawan, where the Palawan indigenous group harvest a high value resin called the Almasiga resin. So I'm so honored to have been given their permission to come and visit their traditional harvesting season. So what they usually do is they tap through the trunk of the tree and they wait for it to for the resin to come out of the trunk for weeks, even months. so that when harvest time is ready, they'll be able to collect it and sell it for their use. No? So we've witnessed how they traditionally do it, and I've listened to the rationale as to why they keep it that way, and even the cultural practices around the harvesting of these valuable resources. It's such an enlightening experience for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And beautiful. And that tree, we can't tell to the naked eye, but it represents so much biodiversity. There's so much life going on there that is difficult to see. Insects, the element, the plant life. There's so much. You know a lot more than I do about all the complexity, but I know there's a lot of life there.
Yeah, definitely. So this tree is actually the mother tree, the mother almasiga tree. That's most visible because it only grows at a specific altitude. And so this tree is on top of this specific peak in one of the mountains of their areas, no, of their ancestral domains. No? And so it from afar, you can see how this one specific tree stands out from the rest of the tree. And so apparently from this mother tree, it grows a network of other almasiga trees that also provide this valuable resin. No? So during the time that they were harvesting this, they were also talking about the insects that also help
Mhm.
um, facilitate the excretion of the sap. So I agree with you. There's more to this photo than what is seen. The trees around help provide coverage for the smaller almasiga trees so that they can grow into a big almasiga tree that provides more. So it's definitely an ecosystem just within this photo.
Well, thank you so much for those photos. And now I want to ask you a more general question. A lot of people in our audience are probably so jealous of you. You get to take your communication skills and apply them to promoting the protection of biodiversity. How did you come to work for the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity?
Hmm. Um, Before the ACB, I was working for an NGO that worked with a lot of indigenous communities in Asia and in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And the ACB has always been one of the institutions that provided uh, support in terms of the technical capacities and in terms of the uh, development discussions around biodiversity at that time. And so after a few years of working for the NGO, the Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program, I found myself being open to more challenging and bigger roles. And so I landed on a job at the ACB, and I couldn't be more thankful for being with the ACB, most especially in this exciting time.
And I'm so excited to hear about your work. President Biden recently, during the U.S. ASEAN Special Summit, talked about initiatives that the United States is doing with Southeast Asia, and we're expanding projects with Southeast Asia, with forestry, the National Park Service, all the concerns of the biodiversity. As you said earlier, it's a group effort, it's a team effort. We need every country to work together. As a communication specialist, as a public affairs specialist, what have you found? What are some of the challenges you've found to convince people that biodiversity is important?
Yeah. I think it's always convenient for many technical persons and academics and policy persons to be blindsided by the communication gaps that are apparently very imminent in terms of their development of their messages. And so, um, one of the things that need to be emphasized is that communication is always storytelling and sharing. And so when we talk about communication, oftentimes the perception is that is it's one way, but communication actually is always a two-way process. No, so you develop a story, you share it with others, they provide you with feedback, and together you co-create a more interesting story, because you both reflect on what has been shared by each other. And so I think there has to be more of that framing of communication as something that is co-created, as opposed to something that is transmitted.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about storytelling, because in a lot of biodiversity campaigns, I see beautiful photos of animals, and we all want our children, our grandchildren, to be live in a world with those animals. So it creates that emotional connection. Biodiversity is a word. People don't always relate to words,
Yeah.
but pictures and stories, that starts to get people thinking.
Yeah.
Now, how do you respond through public affairs and communications when someone says, I'm really concerned about rising oil prices? I don't have time to be concerned about orangutans. How do you respond? How have you been responding? What kind of messages have you been using to respond to that challenge, that potential criticism?
Mhm. It may not seem as obvious, or the links are not as strong yet, but I think when we talk about the rising oil prices or something more pressing like the COVID-19 pandemic, now we
Mhm.
often are prioritizing those that are within our reach. And so it's a natural response to really be focused on that. But I think there's much more value in seeing beyond what you can see. In the same way that we talked about the photo earlier, no, that there's whole lot of ecosystem in this photo of a tree bark alone. No? So when we talk about increasing oil prices, we talk about the increasing demand on non-renewable energy sources, and these oftentimes have implications on biodiversity and oftentimes affecting climate change. And so it's always a good opportunity for us to reflect and learn on how we can improve the ways we do things, so that we'll be able to contribute to the conservation of biodiversity.
Mhm. And I would just say for all communication specialists who are running campaigns, people may not always make the links. And that's what we have to do. We have to help people see the links. For example, I remember hearing stories about concerns about certain types of honeybees that were dying off. Now, most
Mhm.
people might think, oh, honeybees, you get stung. That's a way, well, why should I care about honeybees being stung? But people who study biodiversity know there's a lot of connection between honeybees and food production.
Oh, yeah.
So if you
Yep.
make that link for people and you say, well, we may have food shortages and we may not be able to get your favorite food product to you, then people go, oh, okay, there's more to this story. I didn't realize there are all those layers. That's the
Agree.
complexity of being an advocate.
Yeah, I think by making it more relatable, the task of communicating becomes easier.
Mhm.
When shown a picture of a person manually pollinating trees, for example, in one country, because there aren't much pollinators left in that area, in order
Mhm.
for them to thrive and continue their food production, I think it becomes more real to them. And so by presenting these stories, they may
Yeah.
be textual or visual stories that are relatable. I think it's the key in communicating effectively.
Sure. I'd like to give you the opportunity to dispel any myths about biodiversity, things that people believe very strongly, but maybe are only partially true or not true at all.
Yeah, I think the most pressing myth, or at least story, that needs to be augmented right now would be on zoonotic diseases. No? So oftentimes, um, fauna and animal species implicated in diseases such as COVID, for example, where you have pangolins, bats, you have
Mhm.
specific species of mammals that are receptacles or are storage reservoirs of these viruses, have always been villainized. But um, it's actually nature's way of telling us that we have a broken relationship with nature. And so there's no need for these animals to be villainized, and they transmit these diseases because their habitats have grown smaller. They have lesser room to thrive, and most of these shrinking ecosystems and vulnerable ecosystems are created because of anthropogenic activities. And so this is actually nature's way of somehow getting back at us, and we often don't see it. Oftentimes we just talk about the animals and their roles in transmitting the diseases, but we don't zoom out and we don't see how habitats are threatened. We don't see how these anthropogenic activities are affecting their habitats, thus affecting them, thus affecting us.
The solution to the problem that you are raising is a solution to many kinds of problems. First, ask a lot of questions. Figure out, why has something evolved? Why has this problem developed? So instead of just jumping to conclusions, as you said, villainizing a species, let's figure out what has happened. How do we work together? How can we solve this? Partnerships, working together, saving species when it's not necessary to eradicate them. We can exist together. Oh, there's so much positive stuff in there. Thank you for bringing up that point. Well, Earl, unfortunately, we have run out of time. That was so much fun. I enjoyed talking to you so much. I hope we continue to communicate about these important topics, how to be a good communicator, how to share campaigns on any topic, and of course, the importance of biodiversity. So I do hope to get to the Philippines soon. I hope we get to meet in person.
Would be glad to host you and welcome you to the warm Philippines. I'm just so glad to be,
and visit the center, of course.
Yes, definitely. I'm glad to have been given this opportunity to share communication and its importance in biodiversity conservation, most especially in light of the celebrations around the Biodiversity Day. So thank you very much, Jason, and U.S.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you to our audience for joining us. Until the next time.